Well, welcome back, everybody. We're here at the wrap-up session to deal with the really thorny questions of how does project production management fit with other project management solutions. We've got a great panel here that I want to introduce very quickly. They've all been introduced throughout the day, but again, I just want to mention who they are. I'm Gary Fisher. I'm going to moderate this section. We've got Roberto. He's with Project Production Institute. Jim with McKinsey, Craig with Chevron, and Jan with McKinsey again, and then Adrian with Microsoft. All right, so let's get this ball rolling. We're going to start off with just a softball question here. How did your personal PPM journey start? So Jim, let's start with you.
Thanks, Gary. I thought about this for a second, then I remembered how it really started. So as often happens in consulting, we get asked to respond to an RFP or an RFQ. One of our potential clients will send one out, and this one was very specific. It was someone doing repeatable construction, which I had a lot of experience with in other industries, but it was very specific, and they had asked for using the methodology proposed by the Project Production Institute. And I looked it up, checked it out. So, well, that's interesting. We do a lot of that, right? I mean, think of it as a system and, focus on root cause problem solving. We'll be fine. We've done 3 of these already. So we put our proposal in, all kinds of experience, great case studies, and we lost. So I said, wow, that was interesting. Who are these guys? Right. And it's the, if you can't beat them, join them type situation. And at that point, we and many of my colleagues actually started coming to the PPI meetings, learning more about it, and started realizing that this really is the future, and we wanted to be part of it. So that's my journey.
Okay, how about you, Adrian?
It was an interesting interaction at first. Being at Microsoft, we like to build software, and we believe that we can build everything and anything. And we are learning that we are naive in that belief, obviously. So a number of years ago, we were using Microsoft tools to manage projects, and we're surprised that they are late, they're not on budget, and we have no clue why that is happening. And we started hearing about Project Production Institute and production control principles, and while intriguing at first and not necessarily fully embracing it, once started learning the science behind it and the different approach to traditional project management, realized that this is something that we should be using, and that's how we started.
Yeah, interesting. How about you, Jan?
Yeah, so my journey started doing, I've been doing major project delivery in McKinsey for a while. I was out in South Korea doing a major offshore vessel there, being frustrated with a highly disruptive weld failure rate, figuring out, hey, this is just not working. There's so much disruption and variability here. We're not going to get anywhere. Started thinking like what kind of best practices are out there to start tackling this. Came across PPI and never looked back.
Wow.
Literally the best thing I found. So
good. How about you, Roberto? Never heard your story.
Oh, you have never heard my story? Okay. So, I can tell you several things, but let's do this quick. I have always been passionate with production, right? Production in the sense of, executing work and how can we improve execution within the project life cycle, right? In the old days, I used to work in mining, was doing building construction, and it got to a point where, you have a lot of questions and you look around and honestly, nobody can answer them. Right. And so it got to a point where I decided to stop what I was doing and go and study something new. Right. I ended up meeting very interesting people at UC Berkeley, and that allowed me to develop understanding of production systems and how they behave and the science behind it, and that journey continues today.
Wow, that's good. How about you, Craig?
I guess I started my first formative 20 years in remote construction sites and projects around the world, and then I got, and Gary knows this story well, assigned to a functional role in the center in Houston, and they took me there kicking and screaming because I liked being at the coalface on a project and thinking we're doing the right things and doing the good things. Well, being in the center, I guess, or being in a functional role, you get to look under the hood a little bit, and as Gary showed today, that we weren't really doing that well. We're applying all the tools that we've been given and shown, but we weren't really getting there. So we started looking, I was in the center when we started looking at some different things. It did take me a couple of times to get my head around PPM. I come from a project control supply chain background, but it does show that we are trainable in that space. But I guess, once I got it, it just landed. And I guess I've been very lucky in the past couple of years to, be able to actually practically go out and apply it on projects. And I think that's really opened my eyes and created a passion around it for me as well. So,
Excellent. All right, so now that we're warmed up, let's deal with those thorny issues that are there frequently asked. Does PPM replace, or does PPM change, or how does PPM work with any number of conventional or current project practices? So let's start with you, Jan, and say, how does PPM replace, or does PPM replace critical path scheduling?
Yeah. Okay. Good question. All right, so let's talk about schedules. Let's talk about schedules. Like, what are they, and how do we understand them today? Okay. If we look at schedules today, we see that project teams create them, right, for reporting and forecasting progress. Yeah? So we want to create baselines so that we can do this progress reporting. So what this means is that schedules are basically based in kind of like a project accounting basis. Now, again, so against these baselines, right? In these baselines, we now have this means to identify a critical path. But we know that things go wrong every day on projects. It's a simple fact. So these schedules are often too disconnected from reality, right? That we should ask ourselves the question whether the critical path we've identified is truly the critical path. And we often see a very dynamic critical path on a project. So what we have, what we've seen is that on the base of this critical path, project executives make decisions, and and we see that these decisions can be very poor as a result, right? And people have lost their jobs. This stuff is serious, right? So the point about PPM, right? The value is to focus really on the production, the project production and managing reality. And that's what PPM allows us to do, right? So let me explain that. So if you think about a schedule, the schedule determines the demand for your production system. So you're trying to meet a milestone, and there's a quantity and type of work that we have to do, that we should do within a given time to achieve that milestone. And that's how we then get to define rates that we can achieve. However, that doesn't mean that we can or even will achieve that. And that's the question, right? So to answer whether we can and will, we need to look at the production system. Now, sorry, just to take you guys through that. So if demand from the schedule is higher than the maximum throughput from the production system, the schedule is unattainable. And so in this case, you either have to make changes to your production system, or you have to simply change the schedule. Those are the two options you have. If your demand is lower than what the production system can produce, then the schedule is achievable, right? So if it's achievable, then there might also be even an opportunity to accelerate. Yeah, so we can think like critical path scheduling focus on schedules, right? Which, as we said, is more around accounting, while PPM really allows you to get, that sense of reality, and because we focus on the work that happens and capacity and the impact of variability, right? And how this, sorry, this is good. So PPM allows us to achieve what we want to achieve because we focus on the capacity, the impact of variability, and how that impacts our ability to meet demand, right? And so it's, in that regard, it's a better focus, a better replacement of critical path scheduling.
Yep. So the schedule creates a demand, the production plan creates the ability to deliver on that demand. Okay, Jim, let's move on to you and ask a companion question. Does PPM replace project controls or earned value measurement?
Yeah, that's a big one. We get quite a bit. So what is earned value management, right? I mean, at its fundamental root, earned value management is paying your contractor for work performed based on certain rules of credit, right? Fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a retroactive tool where we look how much work got done and we want to pay for that value of work approximately, right? And this is important. We all know our contractor colleagues are cash flow machines. We spend a lot of time educating our clients on what it means to actually ask for 60 or 90-day payment terms from your contractors because they have to float that amount of cash. We talk about what it means to maybe perhaps make a down payment or initial mobilization payment and how that changes their cash flow, how that change in cash flow, given it two different borrowing rates, actually impacts the cost of your project. We have models that actually assess that. Mm-hmm. So fundamentally, the thought of measuring the amount of work done and paying for that amount of work is a great thing. It doesn't tell you that the right work is getting done. It only tells you an amount of work, right? And most of us, I think, some of us who haven't been burned, maybe those who've only done a few projects might think, hey, if I'm 99% complete, I'm waiting for the painter, right? As soon as the painter's done, I'll be able to move in. But if for those of you who are able to see my presentation, I showed a picture of a pump gallery that was 99.9% done. It was only missing the flow meters, right? Everyone would agree that 99% of the work had been done impeccably. They had threaded rods holding the pipes separated for the exact spacing required for the meters that had yet to show up, right? Nothing could be commissioned, nothing could be tested, nothing was done. Yeah. 99% of it was paid for, but nothing was done. That's where the connection to PPM comes in. PPM, as we know, is the measurement of how the work is getting done. How are we actually turning these systems into something that actually produces the product that we want? And that's what the real value of our projects, typically are all about.
Yep. So this will be a shameless plug for our next webinar on this very topic and talk about the issues and unintended consequences of EVM. But traditional project controls, looking back, it's not control of the work at all. We've talked multiple times about the production system and the controls that it takes to adjust and optimize the production system over time. So it's a great question, and it's one we got to deal with as we go through this transition.
It comes up all the time. Yep, you're right.
Let's move to Craig. Does PPM replace advanced work packaging?
Interesting question. Maybe if we why did we start with advanced work packaging in the first place? There were gaps in the industry, there were gaps in our performance. People who came up with advanced work packaging probably initially, had good intentions. They were out there trying to do the right thing and improve project performance. I don't think anyone goes out and tries to implement things in the industry, to do otherwise. But it really failed to address the fundamental gaps and a change in thinking within projects. And it's probably in some ways harmed project performance in a way because it fails to address some of the operations science principles that we've spoken about today. So a couple of things there. If you think about it, advanced work packaging or installation work packs, whatever, essentially they're constraint management tools. So it's saying that I have, these pieces of work, equipment, materials ready and in place to go to the next stage, which is actually installing the work. So it's doing that. It only works off, what I've typically seen is that it comes off 3D models, tools out there that our EPCs are using. So it fails to address the temporary works that are required. I've seen on projects where an IWP or an installation work pack will say, 22 days to do that piece of work. We've then mapped it out using production control, and it's actually 42 days to do the work because it failed to address the pre-works and the post-works to do that. Now that does sort of cause some issues with our construction guys because they'll go, hang on, it says 22 days. It's got to be 22 days. And we're like, no, you've got to excavate, dewater, scaffold, do all these things to get the work done. The other thing is if you we have a large chunk of work, so a construction work pack, which is a very large piece of work, then we take that, breaking it down into individual work packages that are discipline based. So we're losing the coordination and the interface between the various trades on site. So we're creating constraints that we're not identifying in that space. So then we're actually using at the moment production control or production scheduling to bring back those IWPs together to understand that in that effort. So, and then we have IWPs which are constraints to other IWPs. The other thing is when we're not applying any operation science principles such as batch size or how many packs we have open at a time or things like that, that's where the detrimental is coming in. We have definitely seen from an IWP perspective, the smaller the pack, the better, the better the throughput of that. And if you think about a guy at the work face, he's thinking about the next 5 days worth of work, not the next 3 weeks worth of work. He's got, what do I got to get done this week? So, you still have to chunk the work in some way, whether AWP is it or not. Maybe it's not the solution. We need to look at it in a different way. But you still have to chunk the work in a certain way to go out and do it. But probably an interdisciplinary chunk based on systems with the end in mind also needs to be considered.
Very good question. And my experience is the only thing that actually gets you that boost in performance is the use of project production control. Regardless of how you chunk the work, if you're not using that control, creating production schedules and then controlling that work, it's not going to get better.
Correct.
So Adrian, let's move to you. How does PPM change supplier relationships, or does it?
It does. It does fundamentally in our experience. It's a love-hate relation. I would say it probably starts with just a tiny love, continues with a lot of hate, and then a little bit less hate, and then some love, and turns into a normal, I guess, a 20-year-old marriage in the end. There is resistance to change initially because in order to standardize processes, we had to work with our partners. So you have to go into their kitchen and rearrange a few things there and challenge the way they've been doing the business, trying to understand how actually they are performing, and that is creating some discomfort at first. Once you have a first version of a standard process and you start actually pilot it, you realize that that's not quite how things are working in reality. So you have to go back to the drawing board, and that is creating another tension. And then while the process is working, you have to receive updates from the providers. They are resistant at first, and then embracing it. As I mentioned earlier in the day, we experienced all of these emotions, both on our end and on our partners' end. But we believe we have a successful engagement right now that is win-win because we are transforming not only our business but also their business. And you have the early adopters that are getting this, and you have those that are tagging along, and you have a select few that will never get it, and you have the natural selection process of those that are gonna stay on the sideline and not they will never understand what happened to them.
Yeah, and understood. So you move on. You try,
Mhm.
but then you
have-
move on if
you
it,
have to
if
move
it's
on,
not
yes.
gonna work. Okay, so Roberto, let's ask you the thorny question.
What is it?
Agile and lean are all the rage, especially agile. I'm gonna agile this and agile that. Does
Mhm.
PPM work with agile and lean, or what's the intersection there? What's your perspective?
Well, um, so look, we can certainly talk for hours on these topics alone. And you know, but let me approach your question from the following angle, perhaps. So, look, I'm an engineer, right? I am a civil engineer. One of the things that you are trained when you study engineering is you solve problems, right? You're a problem solver, right? Depends on the engineering that you certainly learned, right? And part of the training is to apply science, right? Is to apply science. And understand situations and understand the behavior of a system. You know, it gets to a point where your intuition is not enough. It might be useful, but there's a line, right? There's a threshold, right? Where you should probably not even cross that threshold, right?
Mhm.
With intuition, because you can make bad decisions, right? And so, for instance, right? I mean, one thing that I can quickly share is the application of material science, for instance, where you study the properties of solid materials and how those properties are determined by the material composition and the structure, right? Material science grew out of an amalgamation of physics, metallurgy, chemistry, and the rich variety of material properties cannot be understood just without the context of a single classical discipline, right?
Mhm.
And so, so science is this connection, is this basic fundamental thing. Another example quickly is how you can understand the behavior of structures, right? And specifically buildings or bridges or you know, dams or things like that, right? There's a significant amount of science that goes behind how we determine the section of a column, the section of a beam, right? We do calculations for that, right? And also even once the structure is fully designed, how it behaves when, for instance, an earthquake of a given magnitude hits, right? And so when you look at, my point is that when you look at the delivery of capital projects also behave a certain way, right? And they do because projects are, without a doubt, an amalgamation of multiple production systems, right? Each production system contributes to the overall performance of the project, right? Our industry, I believe, and I mean the engineering and construction industry, is really enamored with the development of the schedules. This is going back to what Jan, you mentioned, right? And that's not helping us, right? We need to shift to other approaches. So, but let's concentrate on what I'm going with my comments.
Mhm.
There is certainly a science, obviously, operation science, that is the one that behaves, that governs the behavior of production systems, right? And this is good news, but also bad news. Well, let me explain what I mean by that, right? So the good news is that there is a science that we can learn and apply it, as we saw today, for instance, in one of the sessions, right? And also have seen in the digitalization and industrialization sessions, right? The bad news is that the engineering and construction industry doesn't know about this, right? And so we are professionals making decisions without really having a full picture, right? And relying in old-fashioned, for the lack of a better term, ways of doing things, right? And so the idea about production management or project production management is this strong connection with the science, right? It draws a line between other approaches, right? It could include agile. It could include lean. I'm going to talk about that in a minute because I do want to say a few more things about these. And sorry, I'm giving you a long answer, but you got me with that question, and I want to make sure that I can share as much as I can. So in terms of agile, right? Let's talk about that first. One question in my mind is, who doesn't want to be agile, right?
Sure.
You might rarely find someone telling you that they don't want to be agile, because it's typically understood as achieving higher flexibility levels and being able to rapidly respond to changes, right? So, however, the agile movement, and trust me, I don't intend to fully describe it or even talk about history or when it started, but it was actually originally a way of an alternative way of looking at a waterfall, excuse me, a waterfall approach in the software development business, right? In introducing processes like a Scrum and sprints, right? Perhaps if I can select, although this is not a comprehensive necessarily look at the characteristics of Agile, but there are two aspects of Agile that are probably worth highlighting, in my opinion. One is the idea of reducing batches of work, right? And so how do you reduce batching as a mean to going through processes like a sprint? But unfortunately, Agile doesn't tell us if the batches that we are selecting, it doesn't tell us the size of it, right? How do we know the size of it, right? And so in operation science, we know that if we reduce the batch size, we will get the opportunity to reduce cycle time. So my opinion is, yeah, the more we reduce the batches, the more it will help us. But what is the right size, right? That's a different question. I don't think Agile answers that, right? Necessarily, right? Yeah. Again, just one observation, right? The other aspect is that putting people together to do work might indeed increase communication, but in many cases, what I personally have experienced also creates the illusion of operating under higher levels of effectiveness, right? And so I personally have witnessed what many might consider high levels of collaboration, but the work doesn't get done at all, or not as expected, right? Mm-hmm. So there's something beyond just putting people together physically to do work in a sprint and things like that, right? And so on the lean side, and then I finish with a couple more things. Okay. On the lean side, I have personally witnessed how the lean movement in engineering and construction has actually evolved over the years, right? I have no doubts that its origins were with a high emphasis on production, right? And I mean project production, right? I have even personally contributed with several papers written over the years associated with lean production and supply. But somewhere along the way, something has happened. You know, things have shifted heavily to the human side of the equation with the introduction of things such as linguistic action and associated methodologies, right? And so perhaps here's where we find some commonalities with Agile, right? In the need or search for more collaboration, right? I know for sure the fact that there are people that are involved in the lean movement in construction that are still having a very strong production mentality, but we also see, like, you know, a separate group of people that are turning to the more social aspects of things, right? And I don't know how collaboration is going to allow you to get, just by doing that, higher throughput in a production system, yeah. Right? That's not the only element in the equation, right? So, but finishing, Gary, sorry, there's maybe some food for thought that comes to mind very quickly, right? So, human behavior does not define how the production system behaves.
Right.
Right? In many cases, it is the other way around. Right? The second one is higher levels of human collaboration doesn't necessarily guarantee the work gets done. People might collaborate, but not necessarily cooperate, right? We need a science certainly to allow us to do that. So that's what I can tell you in terms of the connection between PPM, Lean, and Agile, or how they might actually fit. Sorry for the long answer.
Thank you, Roberto. It's a tough, I know it's a tough question to throw at you,
Yeah,
but
you got me on that one.
I'm gonna run over just a wee bit of time here. I want to ask Craig one more question and then one question for the audience. Craig, when people say, how do I get started? What do you say?
Get out there and just start doing it. It's the only way to go do it. We're very much invoking a learn by doing approach in Chevron, and we've found that to be very effective. You will hit resistance. Resistance is good because you can see it. So you know who to go and talk to and go adjust. And and I think as Adrian said, some people are going to come on the journey with you and others aren't, and they're potentially going to be left behind in that.
Yeah.
But, get out there and start practicing it. That's how to get after it.
Okay, and we got one more question that came in from the audience. It says, is it correct to say that in your experiences that none of you rely on any specialized software? Anybody want to grab that one? Or perhaps it's too awkward. I can answer it.
I can answer this one. Again, coming from a company that builds software for a living. I would say yes and no. I mean, you don't have any dedicated software, yet there is some software that that is more or less off the shelf. That off the shelf includes most of the capability that you need. So at least we Microsoft came to the realization, why build it when you can buy it, and why go through the struggles of those that went ahead of you, and why trying to replace the experience of tens of customers and recreate and go through that pain. So while you can individual capabilities can be replicated or leveraged using no particular software, all of them combined, that might be a little bit of a challenge.
Gary, can I share something with you very quickly? And this is not about the last question, but maybe just a reflection that I can contribute with. I have been not only passionate about PPM, but also working in the implementation for quite some time. And what do I see, right? I see project teams, I see organizations that are waiting for the perfect moment, right? Whatever their definition is of the perfect moment, right? And that doesn't exist, right? The perfect moment was yesterday, right? And if you don't start doing it, there are others that will. And as Adrian said it, some of them are gonna be left behind. He already sees that, right? And so the question is, what are you waiting for?
Yeah, I agree.
I can add, Garrett, maybe to the software question. If you want to go out and apply operations science, batch size, WIP, throughput, that's software agnostic, those principles out there. So, do we use a specialized software? Yes. It's at the scale of enterprise that we're trying to deploy it. Yes, you need it. And I think sort of that's what Adrian was referring to as well. But we've seen projects where, you don't have to use the specialized software. You can see the throughput, you can calculate that in Excel if you want to, in certain elements. But when you want to get more sophisticated at it, we're using AI now and the data coming out of our software as well. And that's giving us some insights that we never thought we'd see before. So again, get out there, get after it, start it, and then scale from there.
Very good. Okay, thank you all for the comments, and we're going to move to a wrap up here. We've got a little survey that we'd like you all to take. If we can pull up the slide. And again, if you've done surveys before here, use the QR code, or you should have a link pasted into your chat. And we have just 3 simple questions. What are you going to do after you've participated through this whole day? Are you going to do nothing, apply PPM, or you want PPI to contact you and you want to learn more? And we're not going to display these results because obviously we don't want to share people's names and contact information. But if you'd all take a minute and do this survey for us, we'd greatly appreciate it. And Christian, when you're ready, let's move on. So just tack back to what Ed opened up with to begin with. Project Production Institute provides education, research, deployment support. Like you saw on the next slide, we can arrange one-on-one discussions, certification courses, in-house PPM sessions, attend public seminars. There's many different ways to access information. All this, this symposium will be recorded or has been recorded, and we should see that posted here in the next day or two. You're going to get, those of you who attended are going to get a follow-up survey. We'd really appreciate your feedback. Making these better and better is really important. And before I want to close off, there are a large number of people, really skilled, talented people behind the scenes that have made this all possible. And they've worked tirelessly till wee hours of the night to make this happen. I want to thank you all for the support to make this possible. And I want to thank you all for attending. So hope you found it worthwhile, and we'll see you at the next seminar. Thank you.